Reddit, what's your funniest go-to story that is most often requested by your friends? I am frequently asked to retell this story. My friends and I were at a bar, and a cover band was playing. The lead singer was being obnoxious. He was hitting on all the women in the audience in a very lewd manner, and he was being far too pretentious for being in a cover band. It was making everyone uncomfortable and annoyed. At one point during the show he says, "I would like someone special to take the microphone and say a few words." He then lowered the microphone stand so that the microphone was right where his crotch was. I don't know how he had originally planned this segment to pan out, but before he could say anything, I yelled in a high-pitched voice, "I'm so tiny!" The singer was stunned. The audience laughed and cheered. Clearly flustered, he awkwardly raised the stand again and went into the next song. I don't think I'll ever have that good of a comeback again. On to the next story. Probably the time I threw up in my sister's eye. I had just chugged a Pepsi, and my sister was lying down on her bed. With a glint of evil in my eyes, I leaned over, getting ready to let out the largest belch that was stirring in me. She looks up at me, and I get ready to release this horrid belch on her face. Instead of a belch, I threw up bile and Pepsi in her eye. She ran to the bathroom screaming, "You threw up in my eye! Oh my God, it burns!" I was laughing so hard, I ended up throwing up on myself. That was 10 years ago, and we both can't tell the story without laughing about it. Story number 3. My friends love my stories about my dad because he's such an awesome guy, but so stupid sometimes. Here's a recent story. My parents are snowbirds. Winters in FL, summers in NJ. My mom typically flies back and forth, but my dad drives with their 2 dogs, a lab and a boxer. My dad refuses to pay the full ticket price for them to fly. My mom is constantly yelling at my dad about keeping the dogs on their leashes when he walks them, especially when he's traveling and they're in an unfamiliar place. They get way too excited and will tear off running to investigate. He always yesses her to death, then does whatever the fuck he wants anyways. He's a man, so why she expected anything other than that I have no idea. While he was prepping for a recent trip from FL to NJ, she reminded him not to take the dogs off the leashes when he's walking them at rest stops or whatever, because the lab had been especially bad lately with running off and not responding when we called her to come back. She's a bit wild but very sweet. He starts getting mad at her, saying, "Why do you always tell me this like I'm stupid? Like I don't know how to take care of my dogs?" He eventually leaves after they stop arguing, and we think all is fine. Get a call later that night with an update as to how his drive was going. Here's what happened, because of course my dad knows better than my mom and didn't listen. Dad stops to walk dogs at a rest stop. Dad ignores the fact that it had been raining and the grass was puddly and muddy, and lets the dogs out of the car with no leashes, probably while saying something dumb like, "Oh, I know my girls will listen to Daddy and be good and not go in the mud," like he always does. Stupid Dad turns his back to light a smoke and sip his coffee. Dad turns back around and sees the boxer behind him, sniffing the grass and moseying along. Does not see Lab anywhere. Dad strolls around for a minute, calling the lab, no response. Starts to get worried. She's a gorgeous example of a yellow lab, and he was worried someone might take her. Dad turns a corner to see Lab on her back in a huge mud puddle, wiggling around and wagging her tail furiously. The lab is covered in mud. Dad then tries to extract the lab from a puddle. Lab refuses and runs away, thinking he is playing with her. Dad falls in the mud. Lab jumps on Dad. Boxer jumps on the lab because she thinks the lab is hurting my dad. Now everyone is covered in mud. With both dogs' collars finally in hand, Dad drags them to the car and realizes he has to get to a hotel to clean them up ASAP. Then realizes he is going to cover the interior of his nice car with mud. My dad loves Mercedes. The only car he will ever drive, he says. No choice. Dogs and Dad go in the car, and Dogs immediately flop all over the back seat. Dad gets to the hotel. They are skeptical to check him in because he's covered in mud. He explains, clerk laughs, and gives him a key. You'd think this was the end, huh? Nope. Dad finally gets in the room and decides to bathe the lab first. Too bad the lab hates baths and sat in the tub howling the whole time. The boxer now thinks my dad is hurting the lab. She's very protective of her sister and runs into the bathroom and bites my dad on the ass. Hard, no blood though. She knew not to go that far. Dad is now yelling at both dogs. Both dogs are barking and running around the room. The lab escaped the tub when the boxer bit him. Now, Dad is running around the room with his two fake hips, trying to get one of them into the bathroom and shut the door so he can clean up. Now the room is covered in mud too, mind you. Dad gets Lab in the bathroom, shuts the door. The lab starts howling again because of the awful bath. Dad is trying to calm her. Now Boxer is howling in the bedroom because she thinks my dad abandoned her. She has a bit of separation anxiety. Phone rings. Hotel management. Is everything okay? A few of your neighbors have complained about a lot of noise. Dad apologizes and manages not to get kicked out of the hotel, but ends up having to pay for damages to the room. Mud everywhere. I think a lamp got broken during the hole. Everybody freaks out and run around the room. Bit. My mom laughed so hard that she couldn't breathe and had a panic attack. Then started laughing again when she realized what the fuck she just heard. I have never stopped giving him shit for this, but he did admit that Mom was right, and from now on he would listen to her about the dogs only. He says he's right about everything else.